Hello everyone and welcome back to Drue Crime. I'm your host Drue V, and for my second episode in this series I will be covering the infamous unsolved murder case of JonBenet Ramsey. It's now been almost a few months since I've released my first episode, and I do apologize for the short hiatus, but it's been far too long and I'm really excited to get back into this podcast and really put out some good content for you guys. After my first episode in which I covered the unsolved murder of Garrett Phillips, I do have to say that I am very pleased with the feedback I did receive on the episode, and I decided during this time as well to kind of re-look into Garrett's case, and being that there was so much information in Garrett's case, plus all the new information I've found, I believe it certainly does deserve a follow-up episode, so that's also what I've been working on up to this point. And I really do plan on having Garrett's follow-up be my third episode, so I will be releasing that in 2 weeks from the published date of JonBenet. Alright, so now moving on to the JonBenet Ramsey case. This was another case that has an overwhelming amount of evidence. I mean, with literally every piece of evidence in this case, there was some type of opposing opinion, and you really have to sit here and decide for yourself, what evidence it is that you truly do believe or don't believe. In this case, there were also numerous crazy theories and countless amount of documented video footage on the internet. As of September of 2016, the Boulder Police Department has processed more than 1,500 pieces of evidence, including the analysis of over 200 DNA samples. The Major Crimes Unit has received and reviewed or investigated over 20,000 tips, letters, or emails. Detectives have traveled to over 18 states and interviewed or spoken with more than 1,000 individuals. So as you can see, the amount of evidence in this case is literally endless, and there's also a ton of great true crime podcasts that have covered the JonBenet case. A couple of my favorites were the Internet Sleuths and Dark as Hell. And also, if you really want more of like a complete runaround of the JonBenet Ramsey case, tune into the True Crime Garage. I think those guys did a very good detailed job on the case. During the course of finding information and looking at evidence, I also read 2 books on the JonBenet Ramsey case, and one was written by Stephen Thomas, who was a detective for the Boulder Police Department before he resigned in 1998. The other book was written by Cyril Wecht, and he was an American forensic pathologist. And Dr. Wecht, along with Stephen Thomas, both have very strong opinions in this case, and I do feel they both believe the Ramsey family was responsible for the death of their daughter, JonBenet. I do recommend both of these books if you're wanting to know a lot more about this case, but if you are someone who is Team Ramsey, you may not like what you're going to read. Going back in time, I remember growing up and seeing and hearing about the JonBenet Ramsey case when I was around 12 years old. At the time, you would literally go to the grocery store like everyone says and see JonBenet's face and her brother's face plastered all over the place. And I can even remember my mom watching the news and seeing like pageant photos and pageant videos of JonBenet on the television. And besides the O.J. Simpson trial, I can't think of any case that was bigger than the JonBenet Ramsey case when I was growing up. Being that I do live in Colorado nowadays, I felt it was almost kind of necessary to do an episode on JonBenet. JonBenet's case has now remained unsolved for 23 years and still remains one of the most popular cases in true crime history. As I literally got deeper into this rabbit hole of a case, I then started to realize that the Ramseys' involvement in JonBenet's murder was maybe a little more so than I ever thought. There's just so many inconsistencies throughout this case, very strange behavior and decisions that were made by the Ramseys the entire time. There was a 2.5-page ransom note, possibly written by one of the Ramseys themselves. All of the Ramseys changed their stories at one point or another during the course of this case, and in 1999 a grand jury had even decided there was enough evidence to indict both Patsy and John Ramsey on charges of child abuse resulting in death and being accessories to a crime. But the Boulder district attorney at the time, Alex Hunter, never brought charges on the Ramseys. In my opinion, the Boulder Police Department tried to solve this case, but every time they asked for anything that would help them to try and solve it, they were denied by Alex Hunter and the rest of the Boulder DA's office. And these are things such as search warrants that would have granted access for the Boulder PD to Ramsey's phone records, financial records, and etc. It almost feels like this case was never meant to be solved, and I think it's a very popular opinion that it never will. Over the years, there has been many theories of an intruder breaking into Ramsey's home and committing JonBenet's murder, but all of those theories up to this point in time have proven to be false. So, in this episode, I just kind of want to leave out all the theories of it being an intruder that broke in and murdered JonBenet, and we also do have to remember that the intruder theory didn't even come into play until months after JonBenet was murdered. In this case, I really want to focus on the Ramsey family because I do speculate that there were 4 people in the house that night, and only those 4 people know what went on. So please continue to join me as I go through all of my information and what I think is important in this case, and really look at the whole Ramsey family and just try to narrow down all the possibilities that do surround this crazy unsolved murder story. This is True Crime, Episode 2, JonBenet Ramsey.
What's the problem? What's the problem?
I'm trying to kill my parents.
Pardon me?
I would ask you to, as part of this sentencing, to grant me 5 minutes in a locked room with this demon. Would you do that? Yes or no? Would you give me 1 minute? Well, I'm going to have to get something. I want that son of a bitch!
I wish I could say that it just left completely, but no, there are times when I still do have the old compulsions. I was branching out. That's when the cannibalism started. It was a way of making me feel that they were a part of me.
Also, before I get started, I wanted to thank everyone who supported my idea in doing this podcast, and also for all the support from people who have been sharing this as well. It certainly does mean a lot, and it's been a pretty awesome experience so far, so again, thank you for tuning in. Also, if you have a question or would just like to discuss a case, you can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/DrueCrime. Also, you can find me on Twitter at #DrueCrime. Also, you can find me on a podcast site called Anchor, and that's anchor.fm/DrueCrime. Or you may just email me at druecrimepodcast@gmail.com. And just a quick warning, this episode is about the murder of a 6-year-old girl, with reports of possible sexual abuse that may have been going on before and during the time of this murder. So if these types of topics don't sit well with your stomach, I would probably kind of proceed with caution. Unfortunately, it is the reality of the story in this case, and I do feel the abuse is possible evidence that really should be addressed. So our story takes place on December 25th, 1996 in beautiful Boulder, Colorado. The Ramsey family that consisted of the father John, who had been born in Lincoln, Nebraska. He joined the Navy in 1966, served over in the Philippines for 3 years, and then in Atlanta for an additional 8. In 1989, Ramsey formed the Advanced Product Group, one of 3 companies that merged to become Access Graphics. He became president and chief executive officer of Access Graphics, a computer services company and subsidiary of Lockheed Martin. In '96, they had grossed over $1 billion, and Ramsey was actually named Entrepreneur of the Year by the Boulder Chamber of Commerce. His net worth was reported at about $6.4 million as of May 1st, 1996, and he had actually later on told interviewer Barbara Walters that because of this case, it had actually cost his entire family fortune. Also, John was previously married to a woman named Lucinda Johnson, and they both had 2 children of their own that went by the names of Melinda and John Andrew. And John Andrew is someone we will talk about later that was a possible suspect theory at one point. Also, there was the mother, Patsy Ramsey, who was born in Gilbert, West Virginia, She had won the Miss West Virginia Beauty title in 1977, and when Patsy was 23, she married businessman John Ramsey on November 5th, 1980, and she was also a over-the-top show mom when it came to pageants for her daughter, JonBenet. John and Patsy both had 2 children of their own, and one was the son whose name was Burke, and he was 9 years old during the time of JonBenet's murder, and he has been widely speculated as being a possible suspect in the murder of JonBenet, and I don't personally think that Burke is involved in the murder, but I do think that he knows exactly what happened that Christmas night. And then they also had 6-year-old JonBenet, who was said to be very outgoing, a very smart girl. She would participate in pageants and win all the time, and was just said to be a wonderful little girl before her life was taken, Christmas night, 1996. Now getting back to Christmas Day, the Ramsey family had just finished their own Christmas and were to then attend a friend's Christmas dinner party around 5:30 that was hosted by the Whites that evening. Priscilla and Fleet White were the hosts to the dinner party that Christmas evening, and from what I understand, it started out as a very enjoyable occasion. And then at around 8:30 p.m., the Ramseys had decided to leave the Whites' party and return home, which was located at 755 15th Street in Boulder, Colorado. On their way home, they stopped to drop gifts off at the Steins and the Walkers, who were family friends at the time. And then at approximately 9:45 p.m., the Ramseys had returned home and JonBenet had supposedly fallen asleep in the car on the ride home. A few moments later, John Ramsey said once they were home, he would carry JonBenet up to her room and lay her on top of her bed. And this is actually the last time that John Ramsey says he sees JonBenet alive. Real quick, I do have to point out though that John Ramsey had initially said that when they arrived home, that he had read to both children before they would go to bed. And this was a report made by Officer French, who was the first responding officer to the Ramseys the next morning. And according to John, he says that he goes back downstairs to help his son Burke put together a toy he had got for Christmas. After they had put the toy together, John then said they both went to bed. When John said he had gotten to bed, he said Patsy, his wife, was already in their bed as well. The Ramseys family then said they were all asleep by 10:30 p.m. that Christmas night. For the Ramseys did have to arise early the next morning, for they had a second Christmas vacation planned to their other home in Michigan. And it would only be hours later that their lives would change forever.
911 emergency. Police. What's going on? 15th Street. What's going on there, ma'am? We have a kidnapping. Hurry, please. Explain to me what's going on, okay? There's a note left and our daughter's gone. A note was left and your daughter is gone? How old is your daughter? 6 years old. She's gone. 6 years old. How long ago was it? I don't know. I just found the note. And my daughter's gone. Does it say who took her? What? Does it say who took her? I don't know. There's a ransom note here. It's a ransom note? It says FBTC. Victory. Please. Okay, what's your name? Are you Patsy Ramsey? I'm the mother. Oh my God. Please. I'm sending an officer over, okay? Please. Do you know how long she's been gone? No, I don't. Please, we just got out. Is she right here? Oh my God, please. Okay, well, there's somebody. I am, honey. Please. Take a deep breath. Please, okay? Hurry. Patsy.
So that was the infamous call that was made by JonBenet's mother, Patsy Ramsey, the following morning on the 26th at 5:52 a.m. As you can clearly hear in the phone call, they think there's been a kidnapping of JonBenet and a ransom note has been left behind. And you can even notice towards the end, Patsy thinks that she hangs up the phone after calling 911, but the phone doesn't hang up, and it's been speculated for years that you can actually hear other people's voices in the background of this phone call. and those other people are supposedly Burke, Patsy, and John. Yet, I think I can agree with most that after listening to this phone call about 100 times, you can't really make out what anybody is saying in the background. So, up to this point, it's purely speculation as to if there's really anyone conversing in the background. So now we've moved into the early part of the 26th, and I was able to find a deposition from 2001 that was done by John Ramsey with Darnay Hoffman, and this had to deal with a defamation case with a man named Chris Wolf who was being accused of being a suspect, so I believe he was suing the Ramseys. And so John actually gives his account of what he says happened that day on the 26th, so I'm going to kind of play his audio and then chime in along the way.
Morning of December 26th. Briefly summarize what happened when you got up that morning.
Well, I got up, was showering, getting prepared for a trip that we were leaving on early that morning. I heard Patsy scream. I ran downstairs. She told me that JonBenet was missing, that there was a ransom note. She asked me, what should we do? I said, call the police.
So I just want to stop here for a few minutes and kind of talk about the ransom note that was left at the bottom of a spiral staircase on the Ramseys' first floor and was found by Patsy. Now, I feel that this is a very important piece of evidence. I think it does have a lot of clues that are inside the ransom note, and it kind of really shows us who may have written this. And also being that the paper, the notepad it was written on, and the pen that was used was all from inside the Ramsey home. And experts even say that it would have taken anyone about 21 minutes to write this entire ransom note, which doesn't leave a lot of time for an intruder, but it certainly leaves a lot of time for someone who may be engaging in a possible cover-up. Now, it's been speculated for years that the handwriting on the ransom note is very comparable to Patsy's handwriting, and I've also seen a few theories on that it may have been John's handwriting as well. Either way, to this day, it has never been proven to be either of their handwriting that was on the ransom note. So now I'm just going to go ahead and read the ransom note to you. I know that most people know what is on this, but I just want to kind of go over it because I do feel that it does have hidden clues in it that may help point to who wrote this note. So the ransom note reads, Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully. We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction. We respect your business, but not the country that it serves. At this time, we have your daughter in our possession. She is safe and unharmed, and if you want to see her in 1997, you must follow our instructions to this letter. You will withdraw $118,000 from your account. $100,000 of it will be in $100 bills, and the remaining $18,000 in $20 bills. Make sure that you bring an adequate size attaché to the bank, or what they mean is like a bag or a suitcase. When you get home, you will put the money in a brown paper bag. I will call you between 8 and 10 a.m. tomorrow to instruct you on delivery. The delivery will be exhausting, so I advise you to be rested. If we monitor you getting the money early, we might call you early to arrange an earlier delivery of the money, and hence a earlier pickup of your daughter. Any deviation of my instructions will result in the immediate execution of your daughter. You will also be denied her remains for proper burial. The two gentlemen watching over your daughter do particularly not like you, so I advise you not to provoke them. Speaking to anyone about your situation, such as police, FBI, etc., will result in your daughter being beheaded. If we catch you talking to a stray dog, she dies. If you alert bank authorities, she dies. If the money is in any way marked or tampered with, she dies. You will be scanned for electronic devices, and if any are found, she dies. You can try to deceive us, but be warned that we are familiar with law enforcement countermeasures and tactics. You stand a 99% chance of killing your daughter if you try to outsmart us. Follow our instructions, and you stand a 100% chance of getting her back. You and your family are under constant scrutiny as well as the authorities. Don't try to grow a brain, John. You are not the only fat cat around, so don't think that killing will be difficult. Don't underestimate us, John. Use that good southern common sense of yours. It's up to you now, John. Victory, ! And then signed S.B.T.C. So that was the 2.5-page ransom note that was written on the night of JonBenet's murder. And real quick, I just want to point out a few main points of the note that I think are clues that we can kind of use in our theories that correlate with them later on. And at the first page of the note, they say you will withdraw $118,000. Well, what's interesting about that number is that was also the amount of bonus that John Ramsay had received for his Christmas bonus that year. Now, how anybody else would know that, I don't know. So I guess it kind of does fit into an intruder theory somewhere, but I think it's more suspicious that it's an exact number such as what he received that year. A little bit further down the page, it says, I will call you between 8 and 10 a.m. tomorrow to instruct you on delivery. Well, the problem is nobody called between 8 and 10. Nobody called before 8 o'clock, and nobody called after 10 o'clock. And what was suspicious to people is that the Ramsays, after 10 o'clock had came around, never mentioned anything about the phone call from the supposed kidnappers. On the second page of the ransom note, they say not to call any police or FBI, etc. Do not talk to anyone. If they do talk to someone, they stood a 99% chance of killing their daughter. If they followed the instructions and didn't talk to anybody, which the Ramsays did not, they would stand a 100% chance of getting her back. What was strange to me is the 99% chance of their daughter being killed if they did not follow the instructions. Well, on the first page, it clearly says, do not call the police. What did they do right away? They called the police. So that's a 99% chance that JonBenet was going to be dead anyways. Now, would the writer of this ransom note put that because they already knew that she was dead? Also on the first page of the ransom note, it says that they should make sure that you bring an adequate size attaché to the bank. And again, an attaché was like a bag or a suitcase. And it stood out to me because in the suitcase that was found in the basement at the crime scene, next to the window where the supposed intruder had broken in, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation said that there were fibers from the shirt that JonBenet was wearing when her body was found inside that particular suitcase. But there are opposing opinions on this piece of evidence because according to the FBI, the fibers did not match that were inside that suitcase. But I think it does bring credence to the ransom note, being that if they were to bring a large attaché to the bank, wouldn't that be a perfect opportunity to get the body out of the house? But I think somewhere along the line, whoever wrote the ransom note decided against this idea and they went a different direction. And the last part of the ransom note on the third page that I want to point out is the very end when they sign Victory! SBTC. There's been lots of talk about what SBT stands for. And when John Ramsay was in the Navy, he was stationed in the Philippines at a place called Subic Bay. And then a lot of people said that it was Subic Bay Training Center. I guess there's not anything that exists that's called that, but then you put Victory! Well, victory is a word that's used in like a triumph in war, which would be connected with the Navy. Then you put it with Subic Bay. So that was a little red flaggish for me, and I think it definitely points in the direction of someone who was in the military, such as John, who was in the Navy in the 60s.
Sometime during that frantic period, we checked on Burke. He appeared to be asleep to us. A uniformed officer arrived reasonably quickly, and I focused all the energy I could focus on getting my daughter back from that point on.
When the police officer arrived, do you remember the name of the police officer?
I think it was French, was the first one there, Officer French. He asked us all to, Patsy and I, to stay in the sunroom which is a small room off our living room.
You say that he asked you to stay in the sunroom. Did you remain in the sunroom the whole morning?
We did not. Other people arrived. The police arrived.
Now, real quick, when John Ramsey says that people arrived, he was talking about some family friends that Patsy called directly after making the 911 call. And those friends consisted of Fleet and Priscilla White, whom they were with the night before at their Christmas party. And another couple friends, John and Barbara Fernie, were also phoned to come over that morning. And then, shortly after they arrived, Patsy had called their pastor to come over as well. Now, with 5 extra people inside the Ramseys' home, I feel that this is where our crime scene begins to become contaminated.
Did you ever have occasion prior to, say, 1 o'clock in the afternoon to go down to the basement?
Yes,
How many times
twice.
prior to 1 o'clock?
I don't know what time it was.
So Officer French had arrived, and the 5 other people were already in the home. So Officer French goes and looks around, trying to look for anything that might be out of the ordinary. So he goes downstairs to the basement, and he looks around, and he comes up to a door, which is a wine cellar. And it has a latch from the outside, and it was locked, so Officer French did not look inside. Also during this time, one of the friends that had been called over, Fleet White, had said that he went downstairs in the basement to look around, and he actually went into that wine cellar door, did not turn the light on, but he did not see anything when he looked inside. And at this point, John Ramsey does not know that Fleet White was downstairs in the basement. So then Detective Linda Arndt arrives at the scene around 8 o'clock that morning, and after a few hours, the rest of the officers that were on the scene of the crime leave Linda Arndt by herself. So at this point, Linda Arndt is the only police official that is left inside the Ramseys' home.
Prior to Linda Arndt asking you to look around the house, how many times did you go to the basement?
Once.
Do you remember at what time in the morning you went to the basement?
I do not.
All right. Do you remember what you saw in the basement when you went down there?
I saw a partially open window with broken glass and a suitcase beneath the window.
Now, down in the basement, Fleet White also went into the room that had the broken window with the suitcase. He said that the window was actually closed, but it was not latched. And he was able to find a piece of glass that he put on top of the suitcase. And then it was also said by Fleet White that he had moved that suitcase that morning.
May I ask why you went to the basement at that time?
I was trying to determine how someone could have gotten into our house.
Did anyone ask you to go to the basement at that time?
No,
Do you know if anybody saw you go to the basement at that time?
I have no idea.
Did you inform anybody of what you found in the basement?
I don't recall specifically if I did or not. I have a vague recollection of telling Linda Arndt that I found an open window with broken glass, but that I perhaps had broken that glass myself months earlier.
When she asked you to go down to the basement, could you explain why you chose going to the basement since you'd already been there earlier?
So we now know that John Ramsey had been down to the basement twice, and one time was before Detective Arndt had told him to go look around. And this would explain why Detective Arndt says later on that John Ramsey was missing for over an hour that morning.
Did you ask Fleet White to join you?
I think I did, as I recall.
Do you remember exactly the sequence of events when you went down to the basement the second time?
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me where you looked?
I went back into the train room, showed Fleet the broken window, explained to him that I might have broken it myself months ago, showed him the suitcase that I saw under the window, which I felt was very out of place. We looked for any large pieces of broken glass, and then I got up and went to the cellar room, opened the door, and found JonBenet.
Do you remember why you decided to go to the cellar door at that particular time?
It was the next door outside of the train room. Other than that, no, it was a methodical search in my mind.
Was there a reason that you hadn't looked at that door the first time you went down to the basement?
There's no external exit from that room. So the first time I went to the basement, I was trying to figure out how someone could possibly have gotten into our home.
When you opened the cellar door, can you describe, to the best of your recollection today, what it was that you saw?
I saw a white blanket, and I knew immediately I'd found JonBenet.
Had you turned the light on? Or
I don't remember turning the light on.
when you found the white blanket, what did you do?
I took the tape off of her mouth. I tried to untie the cord that was wrapped around her arms, and I kissed her and talked to her. I realized that she wasn't just asleep, that this was not good, and I carried her upstairs.
So right at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon on the 26th, JonBenet Ramsey is found dead inside the Ramsey's wine cellar. The same room that Fleet White had looked into before, but didn't see anything. When JonBenet was found, she had duct tape over her face, she had cord tied around her neck and her wrists, and there was a garrote that was made. And basically what the garrote did was it would tighten around the neck, squeezing, causing a type of asphyxiation or strangulation. Also, there had been a broken paintbrush that was inserted into the vaginal region of JonBenet. There were also a few small abrasions that were found on two different parts of JonBenet's body, and in my opinion, it looks like someone had poked her with something. JonBenet was also covered in a white blanket, and there was a heart that was drawn on the inside palm, I believe, of her left hand. And around JonBenet's body was her favorite pink robe, a pocket knife that did belong to her brother Burke, and there were also a few gifts that were inside the wine cellar that looked like they had been partially opened or hadn't been fully wrapped yet. John Ramsey would then grab JonBenet's body and bring her upstairs, and this is what Detective Arndt had to say about John coming up those stairs.
And I see John Ramsey carrying JonBenet up the last 3 steps from the basement. And my mind exploded. And everything that I had noted that morning that stuck out instantly made sense. And JonBenet was clearly dead. Then she's been dead for a while. I ordered him to put JonBenet down. I knelt next to her and I leaned down to her face. And John leaned down opposite me. And his face was just inches from mine. And we had a nonverbal exchange that I will never forget. And he asked if she was dead. And I said, yes, she's dead. And I told him to go back to the room and to dial 911.
So John then brings JonBenet's body up from the basement as she is placed on the floor. Then Detective Arndt decides she needs to move the body and picks her up and places her in the living room. Both John and Patsy at some point hovered over JonBenet's lifeless body, crying, and really further contaminating the crime scene. Then as JonBenet's body was lying on the floor, John then decides to throw a blanket from the couch over JonBenet's body. And then supposedly someone had put a Colorado Avalanche sweatshirt over JonBenet's feet and ankles, just to once again further contaminate the crime scene. Shortly after JonBenet had been lying on the living room floor, John, who owned 2 private jets at the time, decided he needed to call his pilot and try and arrange for the Ramseys to leave town and fly to Atlanta. Atlanta was where John and Patsy lived before Boulder, and this would also be where his ex-wife and their children lived at the time as well. One of the officers overheard John calling his pilot and told him that he would not be allowed to leave that day. Also, I do have to point out that John Ramsey actually did call his pilot twice that day. The first time was shortly after they had called 911, and I'm assuming that it was to probably tell him that JonBenet had been kidnapped and they weren't going to be able to travel to Michigan that day, so do keep that in mind for later. Then at around 2:30 in the afternoon on the 26th, the Boulder Police Department was able to lock down the crime scene and clear everyone out of the home. And you're probably wondering right now, well, where was the brother Burke this entire time? And according to the Ramseys, Burke had slept through the entire night and didn't hear anything, and then around 7 o'clock that morning, they woke Burke up, got him dressed, and then they take Burke Ramsey over to the White's house for the time being. And Burke was briefly questioned by the Boulder police when he was at home, but John quickly stated to the police that he was asleep throughout the night and knew nothing. So the Ramseys would now be staying at the Fernie's house while their house was being locked down as a crime scene. And John decided at this point to go ahead and get lawyered up, finding out that the Boulder Police Department was kind of gunning for him and Patsy as suspects in the murder of JonBenet. But what was also kind of strange is that John also lawyered up his family in Atlanta. In the meantime, 2 days after the murder on the 27th, John Meyer conducted the autopsy report on JonBenet. And the autopsy revealed that JonBenet had been killed by strangulation and a skull fracture. It has been widely speculated that the skull fracture came from a flashlight that was from inside the home. It has also been speculated that a baseball bat may have been the cause of the fracture. And I've even seen some theories that people have used a golf club as the murder weapon. Also, the coroner said that he was able to find what looked like small fragments of a pineapple or a fruit that was found in JonBenet's stomach and intestines. And I think the pineapple is kind of connected to the Burke theory, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But I truly do feel that the pineapple is just evidence that doesn't play much of a role in this case. The official cause of death was asphyxia by strangulation associated with cranocerebral trauma. There was no evidence of conventional rape, although sexual assault could not be ruled out. And the reason that they felt there was some sexual assault were due to the injuries around her vaginal area. And for many experts, they had claimed that not only had the sexual abuse occurred that night, but it had happened previously before. But another tough piece of evidence to where there is not enough to claim that there was sexual assault beyond a reasonable doubt. And we will be revisiting the possible sexual assault later on in this episode. So at this point, we know that JonBenet has been murdered. The autopsy report has been completed, and we know that someone is responsible for the death of JonBenet. And now at this point, the Boulder Police Department is trying to set up an interview with both John and Patsy Ramsey. But since they heard that the Boulder Police Department was after them as suspects, they didn't want to talk to them and would make excuses such as they weren't ready to talk, they were going through too much. And I personally feel that they did this to buy themselves time to create some type of alibis from that night. So instead, right around a week later, on January 1st, 1997, John and Patsy Ramsey go on CNN for their first interview, proclaiming their innocence and telling an interviewer that their killer is on the loose. And they did this even before they spoke to the Boulder Police Department. In fact, they didn't even speak to the Boulder Police Department in an official interview till 4 months after JonBenet's murder. Also around this time, Patsy and John have submitted numerous handwriting samples to the police to see if they matched with the handwriting that was on the ransom note. I certainly do feel that it looks exactly like Patsy's handwriting, and there's a lot of experts that do agree, but once again, another piece of evidence that is not proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Also, the son Burke would be interviewed a total of 2 times, and there is video footage of these interviews that were done by a child psychologist and one of the detectives from the Boulder Police Department. And I do find that the Burke interviews are actually helpful to this case due to a few things that he does say in the interviews and some of the behaviors that he goes through. So we'll definitely be revisiting Burke a little bit later on once we get into his theory. So as the story goes, the Ramseys end up fighting a very long battle in proving their innocence to the murder of JonBenet. I feel throughout this case that they had a very good defense team that was able to pull strings for them and really kind of let the Ramseys create the narrative to this case. Also, They had what I think is a lot of help from the Boulder County District Attorney's Office. And like I had said before in this episode, there was tons of search warrants that were denied to the police in finding information out about the Ramseys. So honestly, from the get-go, I do feel that the Ramseys were protected. And that's a good reason as to why JonBenet's case would then go cold. So now I'm going to kind of fast forward in time, and real quick, I just want to say that JonBenet's case would remain cold. Then we got into 2006 in the month of June. Patsy Ramsey would then actually pass away and lose her battle with cancer. And then shortly after that, in 2008, there was a new district attorney in this case named Mary Lacey. And she had gotten a hold of some DNA evidence from JonBenet's clothes that she was wearing the night she was murdered, and it did not match anyone from the Ramseys family. And to this day, there is opposing opinions about DNA. Some people think that it's from a single male, and other people think that it's from multiple people. But that was enough for Mary Lacey to exonerate the Ramsey family in 2008. And now fast forwarding about another 8 years again, in 2016, Burke Ramsey does come on to Dr. Phil's show and gives a exclusive first-time interview about JonBenet's death. Other than that, there's been many specials and documentaries on JonBenet. There's even a podcast that was done by one of John Ramsey's son, John Andrew, and it's called The Final Suspects, JonBenet Ramsey Case. And if you are Team Ramsey, you will probably enjoy every second of it. Personally, again, I don't think that there was an intruder that was involved in this murder, but it was very entertaining to say the least. Well, I hope I was able to summarize the high points of this JonBenet case up to this point, and I do apologize that there is a lot of information that I could have gone deeper into or didn't even mention, but I did really want to just kind of focus on the night of the murder and the people that were inside the Ramsey home. So with all of that being said, I would love to dive in to talking about each person of the Ramsey family, including Melinda and John Andrew, who were John's kids from a previous marriage that lived in Atlanta at the time, and then finish with a few theories that I do agree with people on. And then I'll conclude this episode with any other of my opinions or final thoughts.
To those of you who may want to ask, let me address very directly, I did not kill my daughter JonBenet. There have also been innuendos that she has been or was sexually molested. I can tell you those were the most hurtful innuendos to us as a family. They are totally false.
But let me assure you that I did not kill JonBenet. I did not have anything to do with it. I love that child with my whole of my heart and soul. You know, you may be eluding the authorities for a time, but God knows who you are, and we will find you.
Did you hit your sister over the head with a baseball bat or a flashlight?
Absolutely not.
Critics would say you weren't curious because you already knew. He didn't have to get up and go check because he knew exactly what had happened.
I mean, I didn't know if there was some bad guy downstairs and my dad was chasing off with a gun.
Inside the Ramsey home, a flashlight, heavy enough to be a murder weapon. The strangulation device made from the broken handle of Patsy's paintbrush.
So that was my little JonBenet montage there for you to kind of show you that the other three people that were in the Ramsey home that night do claim their innocence. And now we're going to talk about each one of them and provide some theories, and then we'll go ahead and close out the episode. So with the Ramsey family, I wanted to start with Melinda. Melinda is John Ramsey's daughter from a previous marriage, and I don't find her to really be under any type of suspicion. She had said that she worked at a hospital in Marietta, Georgia. She had finished her shift at about 7 a.m. on Christmas Day. That afternoon, John Andrew, Harry Smiles, Melinda, and her boyfriend Stuart Long exchanged gifts at Lucinda's home in Marietta. In the afternoon, they all went across the street to a neighbor's for dinner. Melinda and Stuart Long left the dinner party about 7 p.m., and Melinda started to pack for an early flight the next day. At 9 p.m., they went to visit Guy Long, Stewart's uncle, and after visiting other friends, were home by midnight. And there was no record of Melinda flying on any type of commercial airline or private flight on the night of December 25th, so her alibi is said to be completely solid. And now, John Ramsey had a son in that previous marriage as well, John Andrew. He was a student at CU. He was also in Atlanta at the time. His alibi was that he was with his family during Christmas, and then he went with a few friends to the movies later that night, and they had movie ticket stubs to verify their alibi. So you can't really put John Andrew in Boulder, Colorado. But what was strange about John Andrew was that a neighbor across the street from the Ramseys on Christmas Day, he had said that he thought he saw John Andrew actually walking up to the house. And the neighbor later recanted his statements, so there's not much credibility there at all, and he may have not even known what he saw. So that definitely created some interest towards John Andrew for me. But up to this point, I don't think it's possible really for him to commit the murder and then fly all the way back to Atlanta. And it's not impossible, but I think that his alibi also sticks pretty well that he was in Atlanta during the time of the murder. So now moving on to the Ramsey family that was in Boulder during the time of the murder. I'm going to go ahead and start with Burke. It's been very widely speculated for a long time that Burke was in fact involved in the murder of JonBenet. And there's a lot of evidence that people have found that they say kind of correlates Burke to the murder. And one of them being the pineapple that we talked about earlier in the autopsy that was found in JonBenet's stomach. Well, according to a CBS documentary, Burke was downstairs before the murder was committed, and there was a snack that was found on the table that was milk and pineapple. And we know this because it was left there overnight, and it was in the crime scene photos and videos. But what was interesting about the pineapple is that on the bowl and the spoon, there was Burke's fingerprints, and there was also Patsy's, and I think that Patsy's fingerprints just came from probably putting the dishes away, because Burke's fingerprints was also on a tea glass that was right next to the bowl of pineapple. And the CBS theory goes on to say that JonBenet had snuck back downstairs while Burke was having the snack, and she took a piece of pineapple. He grew very upset, chased after her, grabbed a flashlight, and bonked her on the head, causing the injury, and then the rest unfolds after that. For a long time, I thought there was enough credibility to say that that theory was possible. But again, like I said before, I don't feel that Burke was involved in this murder. But I do think that he was downstairs during the time, because he does say in an interview that he snuck back downstairs when most of the family was almost asleep. So I think since John said that they were putting a toy together, he was then put to bed, and I think it's possible that Burke snuck back downstairs to play with this toy, and while he was at it, he made a snack by himself. And then during the course of trying to enjoy this snack, he was interrupted. And I think that's where his involvement comes in, was possibly hearing or seeing something that happened that night. But again, as far as the murder is concerned, I don't feel Burke is guilty or involved. I just think that he was in the house during the time of the murder. Now I want to move on to the two final people that were inside the Ramsey home that night, and it was John and Patsy Ramsey. And I'm going to go ahead and keep them together because in my speculation in the end, I do feel that after the murder of JonBenet, the two did team up and came up with some type of cover-up to try and hide the truth of what happened. And then as time grew on, they were able to create alibis, and then the intruder theory would come into play. So I just kind of want to start out by saying that I think that the Ramsey family came home that night. I personally speculate that JonBenet was awoken and she walked up the spiral staircase ahead of Patsy to her bedroom. I do speculate that Patsy was finishing packing up for their Michigan trip that they were going to take the next morning. And I think this is kind of at the point of the night where, everyone is accounted for but John. We know that Burke is downstairs putting together a toy. John said that he was with him, but I don't know if that's entirely true. Patsy was packing, and JonBenet was supposedly in her bed at this point in time. So as the night goes on, I think that, and this is pure speculation, that Patsy had finished packing was curious because John had not come up to the room yet. So then she went down to JonBenet's room, and I just speculate that she may have walked in on John, touching JonBenet in her bed at that point. So Patsy did what most any mother would do and grabbed something and went to hit John on the head and missed and accidentally hit JonBenet. Now, most people may think I'm absolutely crazy for even thinking this theory, but I'm going to explain why into the clues that I have found along the way as to why it could make sense that it is a possibility. I do think in the end that it was in fact an accident, and I think that they had to come up with a way to cover it up because somebody said something that was very smart, and it is, how do you make an accident look like an accident? I mean, both John and Patsy Ramsey had everything to lose. Their son, their business, their home, their image. I mean, everything was at stake. So if it was an accident, I feel that they had the need to try and save themselves. So what I think happened is after she was hit in the head on accident, I think this is at the point because she was put to bed in a red turtleneck. Well, that red turtleneck sweater was found in her bathroom, balled up in the sink, if I do remember correctly. But when her body was found, JonBenet was found in I think it was like a white gray shirt that had a star on the front and some long john pants as well. Well, I'm thinking to myself, why would they change her clothes? Because I do speculate that if she was murdered in her bed, that's where the cover-up would then begin. And this makes sense because I have found evidence that shows that the cord that was used, that was wrapped around her wrists and her neck, well, those fibers were also found inside her bed. Also, too, in the autopsy report, and some experts have said that JonBenet had been wiped down. Now, what brings credence to this is I found evidence that there was a bathroom next to John Andrews' bathroom, and all the drawers were pulled out. And Patsy was asked, well, is this unusual? And she said, yes, of course, all the drawers are pulled out. And then she started to list things that were inside those drawers. Well, what was interesting is she listed alcoholic wipes. So I thought to myself, well, if we did an accident, everyone's kind of freaking out, pulling drawers open. Well, we got to clean her up. We got to change her clothes. And then I think that they took her from the bedroom down the spiral staircase to the basement. The reason I think that they did this is because there was a decoration on the spiral staircase, and this decoration was kind of intertwined into JonBenet's hair. And this was according to Detective Linda Arndt. And then once they get down in the basement, that's when I speculate that they continue the staging of JonBenet's murder. So the reason I speculate that the staging would continue down in the Ramsey basement is because there was a neighbor to the north with the last name of Gibbons, and he had said that there was a light on in the house, and I believe it was the butler's kitchen, that normally wasn't on around this time, and I believe it was right around midnight or 12:30 when he saw this light on. Well, what's interesting about this is there was a broken paintbrush that was found in an artist's tote tray, and this artist's tote tray was found down in the basement, and supposedly there was some red fiber that was found inside the tote tray, which would possibly match up with what Patsy was wearing that night. So what really makes the tote tray interesting is that Patsy had said in a 1998 interview with Lou Smits that the tray was normally kept up in the butler kitchen area, which was the same area that the neighbor saw the light on. And Patsy goes on in that interview to say that the tote tray had been moved by someone. So it doesn't really mean that they moved the tote tray that night particularly, but with all of the clues that kind of add up in that area, it is something that is very plausible. Then I believe the tape is then put around her mouth after JonBenet is obviously dead at this point. And I think I did forget to say that after the theory that she was bonked on the head first and then strangled after, they say that the strangulation came 45 minutes to 2 hours after the hit on the head. So in conclusion of this theory, I do speculate that the murder of JonBenet Ramsey was an accident, and then I do feel that someone or somebody's covered up the murder, tried to make it into an intruder theory later on, and then the rest of the story goes. I do understand that there are tons of theories out there, but I do feel that the accident theory lines up with most of the evidence that I've found and seems the most plausible in my opinion. So with all that being said, I just kind of want to go ahead and finish up the episode with a few of my final thoughts on this case. And if you have gotten this far, I do want to thank you for tuning in up to this point. It's been a very long journey, a lot of research, a lot of reading, a lot of audio, but I will have to say that the journey in this case was a rabbit hole, as everyone would explain, and I think the most commonly used word by people in this case is the word frustration. And I think that's exactly what this case is and leads you up to almost every time. This case does really become a guessing game. And so you have to really look at all the angles, all the evidence, and just really try to come up with your own opinion on what may have happened to JonBenet. Now, I found a article, and I will have it posted on my sources as well, and it's from a group in Google, and it says, JonBenet, Dad caught hiding key evidence, and I'll just kind of read it to you. And it says that Ramsay hid deathbed sheets, girls' nightie, and stuffed animals in box, then gave it to a pilot, says source. Homicide detectives are investigating a spectacular tip that John Ramsay sneaked critical evidence out of his home just hours before his daughter was found murdered in the basement. The stunning new information came in a surprise phone call from a well-placed insider to Globe. We immediately checked out the information and turned it over to the Boulder authorities. The tipster, whose information was corroborated by sources close to the investigation, says that John Ramsay slipped a mysterious box to his private pilot in the frantic hours when the cops were still treating JonBenet's disappearance as a kidnapping. Ramsay asked pilot Mike Archuleta, age 46, a trusted close friend, to store the box in the hangar where the tycoon kept his plane, says the source. Archuleta unwittingly spirited the box right out under the noses of cops prowling the mansion in the early hours of December 26, 1996, says the source. Now Globe has learned the damning contents of the mystery box. Sources say the items placed inside it included the sheets and pillowcases that were on JonBenet's bed that night the 6-year-old was slaughtered, and, says experts, molested. A nightgown she was wearing that fateful evening. Several stuffed animals which had been on the little innocent's bed just before the gruesome attack. All those items could contain hairs or other physical evidence that will prove exactly who killed the child and finally lead to justice for JonBenet, say sources. The box's shocking contents may well be the key evidence which will convict John and Patsy Ramsey, declares an insider. In a letter to Globe, Archuleta said our information is inaccurate, but our sources stand by the details they gave us, and 2 detectives recently spent 1 hour at the pilot's home. The latest dramatic twist in the case began at 2:20 a.m. on the morning of Saturday, August 29th, when a phone call came from a confidential source to Globe. The caller was quickly contacted by Globe General Editor Craig Lewis, who has been reporting the JonBenet case in Boulder, Colorado from the outset. By 9 a.m., Lewis was on a plane to meet the caller at an undisclosed location and spent the rest of the day carrying out extensive interviews with the informant and other sources. Early on Sunday, August 30th, Globe editor Tony Frost and Globe legal counsel Mike Kahani decided the information could be significant and that the authorities in Boulder should be informed immediately. At 7 p.m. Sunday night, Sergeant Tom Wickman and Detective Tom Drue went to Mike Archuleta's modest ranch-style house in rural Lafayette, Colorado to interview the pilot. The home is 12 miles from Boulder. This is the blockbuster information that our impeccable sources provided to Globe. Archuleta unwillingly got involved in the case early on the morning of December 26 when he drove to Ramsay's posh $1.3 million mansion on 15th Street in Boulder, says sources. That day, the Ramsays were scheduled to fly to their vacation home in Charilow, Michigan, the insider told Globe. So Archuleta left his own place well before dawn to make a final check on John's private plane before going to pick up the family. When he arrived, he walked right in on a criminal investigation in progress. JonBenet had disappeared and several uniformed officers were on the scene. At that point, they were treating it as a kidnapping because a ransom note was found in the home. Archuleta was sympathetic to the parents' plight when they told him their little girl was missing. While the police officers were busy in another part of the house, John Ramsey took his pilot aside and gave him a box. He explained to Archuleta that the box contained some personal items belonging to JonBenet, and he didn't want them to get ruined during the investigation. He asked Archuleta to store the box in the airport hangar. The unsuspecting pilot did as Ramsey asked. He was certain John and Patsy were victims, not criminals. Archuleta had been a close friend of the family for years and often joined them on vacations and weekend getaways. In May of 1997, 5 months after the murder, Archuleta flew Ramsey to Seattle to play golf. A month later, they took a boating vacation together in Michigan. Soon afterward, the Ramseys moved from Boulder to Atlanta. They sent Archuleta several more boxes of stuff, including Christmas decorations to store for them, says the insider. Later, Mike's wife, Pam, looked in all the boxes. In the first box given to her husband, she saw the sheets and stuffed animals. The box remained in the hangar throughout the critical early months of the murder probe, says the source. The Archuletas apparently never thought to mention the box to the cops, says sources. The hangar had never been searched by investigators when Globe uncovered the strange facts behind the box Autopsy and its sensational contents. Now sources who've closely followed the high-profile murder case say the box could hold the answers to a multitude of nagging questions, including not only the identity of the killer, but the motive for the crime. Case insiders are wondering what evidence might be hidden on or within the nightgown worn by JonBenet that awful night. The bed sheets could contain evidence that she wet the bed, causing her mother Patsy to fly into a rage, or there could be semen left by a male molester. Investigators found fresh sheets on JonBenet's bed right after her dad carried her broken body up from the basement. Detectives found it odd that the sheets on the tragic Tyke's bed weren't wrinkled. Because Patsy had claimed she tucked her daughter into bed around 10 p.m., cops wondered whether the murderer had replaced clue-laden sheets before they arrived on the scene. Patsy also said JonBenet was in nightclothes when put to bed. But as Globe reported August 4th, her favorite pink Barbie nightdress was placed close to her body in the basement, and police say the body was clad in long thermal underpants and a crew neck top. Sources suspect the stuffed animals might contain hair, fibers, semen, blood, saliva, or other physical evidence that could identify the killer, says the insider. If the Ramseys are guilty, they would have been desperate to remove evidence before the police discovered the truth, that this wasn't a kidnapping, but a hideous murder. These latest revelations represent the most startling direct evidence that John and Patsy could be guilty of their daughter's murder. Why else would they be so anxious to have their pilot friend take away the potential evidence? As Globe went to press, investigators were keeping mum on whether they found the mystery box. But our sources say that Pam Archuleta told friends she recalled the box still being in the hangar last August. Mike Archuleta could end up testifying before the grand jury, called by District Attorney Hunter to probe JonBenet's murder, says sources. Globe also has learned exclusively from a source that Mike overheard John Ramsey's former friend, oilman Fleet White, accuse the dad of involvement in the murder. White was with Ramsey when the Tot's body was found in a basement room shortly after 1 p.m. on December 26, 1996. Mike later told a pal he heard Fleet say to John, "You didn't want me going in that room. You did everything you could to keep me from looking in there. Now I see why. I know you're involved in this. I'm sure this must have been some kind of accident that you're trying to cover up, but you need to come clean." Mike told his pal that Ramsey didn't respond to White's comments, claims our source. In a later confrontation, White flatly accused Ramsey of murder, and the two got into a heated argument, says the source. Sources close to the murder probe believe Globe's new discoveries could point the finger of guilt straight to the parents. If the Ramseys hid the sheets from JonBenet's bed, then they were desperate and running scared early on December 26, noted a case insider. This could prove that John and Patsy were involved in the violent death of their beautiful little daughter. If such a box exists, and it was in possession of the pilot, and only came to light when his wife found it hidden in the hangar, then I've got to think there's a good reason this guy needs a lawyer. And then at the end of the article, it is signed JB, and the date from the article from this site was September of '98. So whether this information from this article is in fact true from all these insiders, then I would say that this case would be brought to new life. But unfortunately, it's something that's on the internet. There's nothing that proves this beyond a reasonable doubt. So unfortunately, It's just another possible theory in the JonBenet Ramsey case. So in concluding this episode, I want to thank everyone that tuned in to listen. I know that this case provided much information, endless evidence, and there again is so many points that I didn't touch on, but I really just kind of wanted to tell the story of what may have happened in the Ramsey home, and I hope I was able to bring some new evidence to light. So again, in this case, take it as it is, form your own opinion, build your own narrative, but I think until someone does do some talking one day, that unfortunately this case will never be solved. And with all that being said, thank you everyone again for tuning in. Do join me next time on my third episode, which will be a follow-up to the Garrett Phillips episode. Again, I felt like I have found so much more new information that it just certainly does deserve a follow-up, and I think it will be a really good episode with a lot of great content. So again, a friendly reminder during these tough times, love everyone, but trust no one. I'm Drue V. This is Drue Crime. We'll see you guys next time. Hello everyone and welcome back to Drue Crime. I'm your host Drue V, and